All right, let's get right into it. In a recent, pretty sprawling interview with Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones laid out his entire worldview. And it's a lot. So what we're going to do in this explainer is unpack that perspective, piece by piece, and look at the interconnected threats he described, from global war all the way to a total collapse at home.
And this quote? It really sets the tone for everything else. It captures the absolute urgency, the apocalyptic feeling behind this whole worldview. The idea here isn't that this is just politics as usual. No, it's about a civilization that's right on the edge of a cliff.
So, the first big piece of this puzzle is all about geopolitics. The core argument is that we aren't just heading for a new world war, we're actually already in one.
And the immediate flashpoint, the place where it could all go nuclear, is Ukraine. The claim is that the war there has hit a brand new, way more dangerous phase. Specifically, the idea that the US might send long-range Tomahawk missiles. Well, that's being presented as a total red line for Russia. It's basically seen as an act of war that could kick off a direct, full-blown conflict.
But according to Jones, this isn't happening by accident. This slide lays out the supposed strategy behind it all. Step 1. Provoke Russia using what he calls false flag attacks in Europe. Secret operations made to look like someone else did them. Step 2. Use that mess to drag the US straight into the fight. Now, the stated political goal is supposedly to break Russia itself into pieces, but the real endgame, the ultimate target, is described as something much, much bigger: the total destruction of Christian civilization. Okay, so let's shift gears from the threat out there to the one supposedly brewing right here at home. The argument is that while this world war is being engineered overseas, another plan is underway to light a fire in the United States, a civil war, and it's called the Podesta Plan.
So what is the Podesta Plan? Well, as it's described in the interview, it was a Democratic Party war game from back in 2020. And this wasn't just a political strategy session, it was allegedly a detailed blueprint for how to kick off a second American Civil War if Trump had won the election. And here's the supposed playbook, broken down step by step. It would start with blue states actually seceding, using hot-button issues as the reason. That then leads to engineered chaos in the streets, which sets the stage for a huge triggering event, a so-called massacre of migrants. After that, the US military supposedly turns and sides with the states that left, and the whole thing explodes into a nationwide, race-based civil war. Now, the argument here is that this isn't just some old plan collecting dust on a shelf. The claim is that it's being actively pushed on us right now, through culture and politics. The movie Civil War, for instance, is pointed to as a form of predictive programming, basically using entertainment to get the public used to an idea before it happens. And that's supposedly paired with politicians who are out there calling for a forceful uprising.
So that brings us to the next layer of this whole thing, the big economic theory that's supposed to connect the dots between the global war and the Civil War. It's called the Great Reset Agenda. Now, that's a term that came from the World Economic Forum, but here it's interpreted as a master plan for total centralized global control.
According to this worldview, all that chaos, the wars, the unrest, it all serves a bigger economic goal. The objectives are pretty clear. Use an engineered economic collapse to manage global debt. That collapse then lets them roll out a whole new system of control, with things like carbon lockdowns, these 15-minute cities, a totally cashless society that's tied to a social credit score, and ultimately a smaller world population through resource control. And this quote from the interview just perfectly sums up the perceived endgame. It's not just about control for control's sake. It's described as a full-on return to an old-world social structure. Basically, a new kind of feudalism, where regular people have no property, no rights. As he puts it, it's just slavery. So who's supposedly pulling the strings? The interview points the finger directly at some very powerful groups. The World Economic Forum is named as the ideological think tank behind it all, while massive financial firms like BlackRock are accused of actually using their power to sabotage the world economy and put the plan into action.
Okay, so we've gone from geopolitics to civil war to economics, but the final layer, the very core of this worldview, argues that the real fight, it isn't about money or land or power. It's a war on civilization itself.
So why the West? What's the strategic logic here? Well, the argument is that as long as free and successful Western countries exist, they're like a living, breathing advertisement for an alternative. They're an uncontrollable control group that proves there's another way to live besides the top-down globalist model. And for that reason, for the big plan to work, the West has to be brought down.
And this breaks down the specific targets, the pillars of Western society that are supposedly in the crosshairs. First and foremost,
Christian civilization is seen as the main enemy. Then there's meritocracy, the idea that you succeed based on your own merits. That has to be dismantled. And finally, the traditional family unit is viewed as a fundamental roadblock that needs to be demoralized and broken apart.
To back up this claim, the interview says this isn't something new. It's a long-term global war. It points to examples like the collapse of Christian communities in Iraq after the US invasion, what's happened in Syria, and even frames the Rwandan genocide as fundamentally being an attack on the Christian Tutsi minority, all to argue that this is part of a much larger historical pattern.
So after all that, the geopolitics, the civil war, the economic reset, the war on civilization, what does it all boil down to? Well, this entire complicated worldview gets simplified into one final, very stark choice between two possible futures for all of humanity.
And here it is, that choice, laid out right next to each other. On one side, you've got what's called the 1776 civilization. That represents freedom, liberty, merit, and human empowerment. And on the other side is the 1984 civilization, a future of total control, slavery, and what he calls an anti-human totalitarian death cult. The choice, as it's presented here, could not be more black and white.
The call to action at the end of all this is wrapped up in this famous quote from Benjamin Franklin. The point is that freedom isn't guaranteed. It's something fragile that has to be actively defended by people who are paying attention, who are informed, and who are willing to stand up for it.
And that brings us to the end. After mapping out this entire worldview, from a brewing world war to this final choice for civilization, we're not left with an easy answer. We're left with a really important question to think about. What actually happens? What's the real-world impact when these kinds of ideas and this intense sense of urgency start to shape the reality for millions and millions of people?